They never chase what's handed to them. They chase what disappears mid-sentence, what pulls away just before they reach it. That's the secret no one tells you. The less you give, the more they want. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Power isn't about generosity. It's about starvation. It's about offering a glimpse, then retreating into silence. Whether in love, politics, or reputation, those who give too much are discarded, but those who withhold carefully, coldly, are chased. Not because they give, but because they don't. You don't need to be the smartest, the strongest, or the loudest. You just need to be slightly out of reach. People desire what they cannot fully grasp, not what clings to them. This is the law of starved desire. If you want to be chased, do not feed them. Offer value, but only in fragments. Show interest, but never devotion. Give just enough to wake the hunger, then vanish before they're full. It's the space between moments that breeds obsession, not the moments themselves. Machiavelli saw how kings maintain power not by satisfying their subjects, but by letting them hope and withholding that hope at the right time. The same applies today. The employee who doesn't beg for approval, the friend who stays quiet when drama unfolds, the lover who disappears after giving the perfect night. These are the ones who are remembered, talked about, missed. Why? Because we don't chase what we've already consumed, we chase what we almost had. Your value rises the moment your presence shrinks. Not because you're being cruel, but because you understand human nature. Desire thrives in gaps, in unanswered texts, delayed responses, unfinished stories, withheld praise. When you give too much, too fast, you become predictable. And once you're predictable, you're replaceable. The trick is not manipulation, it's control. Control of your time, your attention, your words. The more disciplined you are with your presence, the more power you hold in their mind. They won't admit it, but the one they think about is the one who never fully gave in, the one who stayed calm, the one who kept something for themselves. That is how you create value in a world addicted to overexposure. Let them wonder, let them wait, let them ache, because once they feel the emptiness of your absence, they'll finally understand the weight of your presence. They say absence makes the heart grow fonder, but Machiavelli would say absence makes the mind grow obsessed. In truth, it's not love or admiration that fuels the chase. It's curiosity fed by starvation. The moment you remove yourself from a space where you were once visible, people don't move on. They rewind, they replay, they start to ask questions not because they miss you, but because the story you were telling suddenly went silent. Humans are not wired to handle open loops. We seek resolution, closure, the end of the sentence. But when you withhold that ending, when you disappear mid-act, you turn yourself into a living mystery. And that mystery is what burns into memory. Think of the performer who exits at the peak of applause, the friend who steps back just when the group becomes too loud, the leader who says less when expected to say more. All of them trigger the same response: people lean in. The brain chases what's unfinished. It fills in the gaps with fantasy, analysis, doubt. Absence magnifies what presence can't. When you're around all the time, you become a background noise. But remove yourself, and your silence becomes louder than words. This is why obsession is rarely about what someone gave. It's about what they took away. They left the room. They stopped texting. They withheld a truth. And now the mind has a void it can't stop circling. Machiavelli knew that power was not always in the sword, but in the distance from it. When people couldn't read your next move, they feared it. When they couldn't reach your attention, they craved it. This isn't about arrogance, it's about leverage. You create space not to punish, but to amplify value. When you are present constantly, you train people to expect you. When you disappear without warning, you remind them that your presence was never guaranteed. And once they realize you are not easy to access, they begin to pursue. Not because you said something profound, but because you didn't say anything at all. Your silence becomes the story. Your absence becomes the signal that something is missing and that something is you. So the next time you feel pressure to stay available, to respond quickly, to always be seen, pause. Remember that desire is born in gaps. Obsession is born in withdrawal. And the chase doesn't begin when you give more. It begins when you give less, and then vanish. Desire dies the moment you give too much, too soon. It's not generosity that kills power, it's overexposure. Machiavelli understood that the fastest way to lose control over someone is to satisfy them completely. Because once a person is full, they stop reaching. Once they feel certain of your value, your presence, your affection, or your attention, they begin to reduce it in their own mind. What once felt rare becomes routine. What once thrilled them now blends into the background. Most people make the mistake of thinking that giving more will secure their place. They pour out loyalty, availability, compliments, love, all with the hope of being appreciated. But the human mind doesn't reward what's handed over without resistance. It rewards what is earned, delayed, almost lost. Give everything, and you kill the appetite. Give nothing, and you never enter the game. The trick is to calibrate, to give just enough to stir the hunger, and then stop. Let them sit with it. Let them feel it. Let the lack sharpen their craving. Machiavelli didn't advocate for cruelty. He advocated for timing. When you reveal everything about yourself in the early stages, whether in friendship, business, or romance, you remove the mystery, the edge, the value. You become someone they can read like a brochure, not a novel. And people don't chase what they already understand. They chase what still has layers, what still feels dangerous, what still holds something back. The moment they believe they have you, the game ends, and so does their respect. Withholding is not about games, it's about control. When you speak less than they expect, when you show less emotion than they're used to, when you take a little longer to reply, you don't push them away, you pull them in. You shift the power dynamic from reaction to direction. You become the source of emotional rhythm. They wait for you. They check for signs. They wonder what you're thinking. And that wondering becomes the root of attachment. But if you give too much, if you explain everything, show every feeling, offer every hour, you make yourself cheap in their mind. Not because you are, but because the human brain undervalues what it doesn't have to work for. To hold someone's attention, to keep their interest burning, to build desire that lasts, you must master one rule. Leave them a little hungry, always, because once they feel full, they will start looking for something else to chase, and that something will not be you. Scarcity is the oldest trick in the book, and still the most effective. What people can't have, they inflate. What's everywhere, they ignore. Machiavelli knew this truth well before modern psychology gave it a name. When something is scarce, the human mind doesn't just want it, it becomes convinced it must have it. Not because of the object's actual value, but because of its limited availability. This is why the most desired people are not always the best looking, the smartest, or the kindest. They are simply the ones who are harder to reach, the ones who say no, the ones who seem to be in control of their time, their energy, and their emotions. People confuse scarcity with arrogance, but it's something colder than that. It's discipline, the ability to withhold not because you're playing games, but because you know the game. You understand that if you flood the market with your presence, you crash your own value. Just like gold is only precious because it's rare, so is your attention, so is your energy, so is your approval. And the moment you hand it out freely to everyone, it becomes worthless to everyone. When someone sees you constantly available, constantly responsive, constantly validating, they stop chasing, they stop trying. Because why try for something that's always there? Machiavelli advised rulers to maintain a certain distance from the public, to appear generous but not accessible, powerful but not common. The same strategy works on a psychological level. Scarcity works not because people are rational, but because they're emotional. We don't want what makes sense. We want what feels slightly out of reach. That's why the most powerful person in the room is the one who doesn't rush to speak. That's why the one who walks away first becomes the one they remember. The mind attaches urgency to scarcity. It starts to believe that if you're not available now, you might not be later. And that thought alone creates pressure. It triggers pursuit. It turns a passive interest into an active need. You don't have to be better than anyone else, you just have to be less accessible than them. That one difference can elevate your value beyond reason. So if you want to be chased, if you want to be respected, stop giving everything away. Speak less, show up less, reveal less. Let your absence become a form of currency. Let your silence raise your price. Because what is rare becomes sacred, not by nature, but by design. And when you control your availability, you control your value. Machiavelli would tell you, power is not always taken. Sometimes it's simply withheld. The things people fight hardest for are the ones they had to earn. It's a simple rule, but one most forget. When something is given freely, it's taken lightly. But when it requires effort, risk, or sacrifice, it becomes meaningful, even sacred. Machiavelli understood this from the battlefield to the court. He knew that when people are forced to struggle for something, they convince themselves it must be valuable, because no one wants to believe they worked hard for nothing. So the chase becomes emotional, the effort becomes justification, and the person who made them earn it becomes the one they can't forget. This is the law of earned value. When you give someone your time, your trust, or your presence, without making them prove they deserve it, they don't feel lucky. They feel entitled. But if you make them wait, make them question, make them try and then offer only a glimpse, they assign more worth to you than you ever had to claim. The illusion of value becomes real in their mind because they had to climb to get it. And climbing always makes the view feel better. Look at relationships, careers, even friendships. The ones that come easy vanish fast. But the ones built on earned moments where access was slow, where approval was not guaranteed, those are the ones people hold on to. Because they had to bleed a little for them. This doesn't mean you must be cold or manipulative. It means you must be deliberate. Don't offer trust without discernment. Don't pour attention into people who never earned your silence. Don't give your story to anyone who didn't bother to listen to your quiet. You don't owe your energy to those who haven't shown they can respect it. Machiavelli would say it simply, people value what they fear to lose, not what they're handed. So make them earn your softness. Make them prove they can handle your truth. Withhold the full picture. Let them work for the pieces. Because every time they lean in, every time they try a little harder, every time they guess and fall short, they become more invested. Not in you necessarily, but in the version of you they're building in their mind. And that version is priceless to them because it wasn't cheap. That is how you create desire that sustains itself. You don't force it. You forge it, one test at a time, one withheld truth at a time. And when they finally reach the edge of your world and see that you still have more they haven't touched, they'll keep chasing. Not because you asked them to, but because you made them feel they had to. Chasing is not triggered by noise. It's triggered by stillness. The colder you are, the hotter they burn. This is the paradox most people never understand. They think more intensity creates more connection, more energy means more desire. But Machiavelli would disagree. In every relationship, the one who stays calm holds the leash. The one who reacts less dictates the rhythm. The one who feels less controls the one who feels more. And in silence, that control becomes visible. Cold patience is not detachment for the sake of pride, it's strategy. It's power wrapped in restraint. When you don't respond to their pressure, their confusion grows. When you don't feed their expectations, their curiosity sharpens. And when you sit with your silence, they are the ones who start to move. They check your profile. They reread your words. They imagine scenarios. Because humans hate emotional imbalance. When someone feels more than the other, they panic, they chase, they overthink. They begin to act out of desperation, just to bring balance back to what you've quietly broken. And that's when your value begins to rise. Not because you said something profound, but because you said nothing at all. Cold patience is about waiting long enough for them to reveal what they would never admit under pressure. It's about creating space so wide that they either fill it with pursuit or expose themselves trying to escape it. Either way, you win. Machiavelli believed that in power dynamics, the one who can endure silence longest controls the outcome, because silence forces truth to surface. It makes them confess things, not with words, but with patterns. A delayed reply, a sudden compliment, a frustrated insult, a relapse into obsession. They all reveal one thing: they are losing composure, and you are not. Cold patience is your armor. It protects your energy. It reveals their intentions. It buys you time. And most importantly, it makes them feel the distance between your world and theirs. That distance is where attraction lives. That tension is where desire sharpens. If you rush to fill the silence, you reset the balance. You give away the power you were earning simply by standing still. So next time someone pulls away, waits, tests you, challenges you with their own silence, don't flinch. Stay colder. Stay slower. Let time do your talking. Because power doesn't always move. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it disappears into the quiet and makes others come find it. And when they do, they will come running not because you chased, but because you didn't. Give them a taste, then disappear. That's the rhythm that keeps people chasing. The mistake most make is giving too little and expecting interest, or giving too much and expecting loyalty. But the ones who truly captivate understand the middle, the tease, the spark, the vanishing act. You show them what it feels like to have you, just for a moment. The attention is sharp, the presence unforgettable, the connection real. And then you pull it back. No warning, no explanation, just stillness. That gap between intensity and absence becomes unbearable for most. The mind doesn't process it calmly. It obsesses. It replays the moment, the way you looked at them, the way you made them feel seen. It tries to figure out what changed, what went wrong, what it means. And in that mental spin, they become addicted. Not to you, but to the mystery of you. Machiavelli understood this when he observed the behavior of rulers and lovers alike. If you make them feel the warmth of your fire once, They will crawl through darkness just to feel it again. But if you leave the fire burning all the time, they stop noticing the heat. They walk away bored. The key is contrast. Give them brightness and then cast a shadow. Show them sweetness and then close the door. Leave them wondering if they imagined it all. Desire is born in gaps. When you give them a taste, you give their imagination something to feed on. They fill in the silence with fantasy. They paint you bigger, deeper, more important than you really are. And when you return, if you return, they treat your presence as a gift, not a given. That is the power of the disappearing act. You are not avoiding them. You are creating emotional altitude. You are removing yourself just long enough for them to feel the lack, and in that lack, they elevate you. They start to believe you are worth chasing, not because you gave everything, but because you gave just enough to be missed. This doesn't mean being cruel. It means being intentional. Give the compliment that lingers. Send the message that opens a door, then walk through your own. Make the memory stick and let silence echo behind it. You will find that people don't chase what they understand. They chase what they almost had. And when you give them a taste of something rare and then leave them hungry, they will come back not just for more, but for all of it. Even if you never promised it, especially if you didn't, almost is more powerful than having. It leaves a mark that full satisfaction never can. The mind becomes addicted not to the thing itself, but to the nearness of it, the feeling of brushing against something you can't quite hold. Machiavelli would have called it strategic denial. But it's deeper than that. It's the art of keeping someone just close enough to feel the heat, but far enough to keep chasing the flame. You show them the door, but never give them the key. You hint, but don't confirm. You leave space for doubt. And in that space, they create fantasy. People do not fall in love with certainty. They fall in love with potential, with the version of you they built in their imagination because you never revealed too much, with the connection that could have been had things gone differently. Almost is the thread that keeps them tangled. They think of what could have happened, what you could have said, what they could have done, and that thinking turns to craving, because the human brain hates loose ends. It loops, it wonders, it replays. And you, the one who left it unfinished, become unforgettable. This is how desire sustains itself, not through completion, but through interruption. Machiavelli warned against showing your full hand too soon. He knew that once people feel they've figured you out, they lose interest. Mystery fades, value drops, and power shifts. But when you remain partially unknown, when you give them 90% and leave the last 10 just out of reach, they will return again and again to try to close the gap. They will justify your silence, overanalyze your pauses, interpret your distance as depth, and in doing so, they hand you more power than they'd ever admit. Almost is not manipulation, it's positioning. It's knowing when to stop speaking, when to walk away, when to smile but say nothing. You create tension not by force, but by restraint. And that tension, if managed well, keeps them locked in place. Because unlike closure, almost never fades. It haunts. It echoes. It lingers in the spaces where certainty would have died. When you are almost everything they wanted, you become more powerful than if you had been exactly that. Because they will chase the remaining piece, the unfinished ending, the missing answer. And they will do so long after you've moved on. That is the Machiavellian advantage to remain a question in a world desperate for conclusions. Let others give themselves away. You, stay incomplete. Stay just out of reach. Stay almost. Because almost is what makes them keep coming back. You don't have to chase anyone to be desired. In fact, the more you chase, the more you shrink in their eyes. Machiavelli would never run after attention. He would create gravity, the kind that pulls people in without begging, without noise, without sacrifice. And that gravity is built through distance, control, and unpredictability. You become the one they think about, not because you're loud, but because you're unreadable. You're not cold, but you're not warm enough to be assumed. You're not absent, but you're not always present either. You stay in that in-between space where their mind starts to work overtime trying to decode you, and that decoding is what binds them. The mistake people make is thinking desire comes from effort, that if you just show enough affection, enough attention, enough loyalty, they'll stay. But the truth is, effort only matters if they perceive you as valuable, and perceived value comes from restraint, from knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, from knowing when to lean in and when to disappear. The less you react, the more curious they become. The less you offer, the more they wonder. The key is not to starve them to death just enough to keep the hunger alive. That's where attraction lives. Not in what you give, but in what you withhold. People don't chase what they already hold. They chase what they feel they're about to lose. The goal is to become a source of emotional contrast. Be the calm in a world full of noise. Be the one who listens more than speaks. Be the one who doesn't explain themselves just to be understood. All of that creates a rare energy, and people chase what's rare. Machiavelli knew that attention is currency, and giving it away carelessly bankrupts you. Instead, he would suggest building a presence that invites curiosity, but never answers it fully. A presence that gives enough to stay in their orbit, but not enough for them to predict your next move. This is how you stay in control. This is how you draw them in without lifting a finger. You don't need to perform. You don't need to outshine. You need to become a question they can't stop asking, a riddle they can't solve, and the more they try to figure you out, the deeper they fall. This isn't arrogance, it's structure. You control how you're perceived by controlling what you reveal. The less predictable you are, the more magnetic you become. So stop chasing. Make them come to you. Make them wonder why they can't stop thinking about you. And when they do, don't explain. Let the silence do its work. Let your absence echo. Let them feel what it means to want someone who doesn't need to be wanted. Silence is not emptiness, it's tension. A loaded space where imagination does the talking and desire sharpens its teeth. Most people fear silence because they believe it means something is wrong. But Machiavelli knew better. He understood that silence was a message, a mirror, a trap. When used intentionally, it becomes a force louder than any outburst. It forces others to fill the gap, to chase closure, to reveal themselves. Speak constantly, and you teach them to stop listening. Go quiet, and you force them to lean in. This is not about passive aggression. It's about emotional leverage. When someone expects a reply and you give none, they feel the pressure of their own anticipation. The longer the silence, the louder their doubts become. Did I say the wrong thing? Did I go too far? Are they pulling away? The silence becomes a stage where their own thoughts perform. You don't have to lift a finger. Their own mind becomes your messenger. This is where power lives. Not in confrontation, but in the quiet after it. In the decision not to react, not to explain, not to validate. In the art of doing nothing and letting that nothing mean everything. Machiavelli would advise rulers to speak less, not just for strategy, but to maintain fear. A ruler who is always speaking is always revealing, but one who watches in silence, who listens without reacting, becomes a figure of mystery, and mystery becomes myth. In the personal world, the same applies. Go silent at the right moment, and you change the tone of a connection. You introduce doubt, reflection, longing. You shift from being an open book to a locked one. And suddenly, they care more about the pages they haven't read than the ones you already shared. That's the psychological hook. Silence activates the imagination, and imagination always paints a more compelling picture than reality ever could. So let them sit with your silence. Let them grow uncomfortable. Let them dig through their own behavior trying to understand your absence. And in doing so, you become unforgettable. Not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. That silence will echo longer than any explanation. It will leave them checking their phone, reading old messages, imagining what you're thinking. That is emotional influence. Not force, not noise, but calm, cold stillness. You become the one they remember, not for chasing them, but for leaving them alone in a room with their own thoughts. That is the power of silence. It doesn't demand. It haunts. It doesn't argue. It lingers. And when they finally break and reach out, desperate to break the silence, you'll know it worked. Because the one who breaks first always loses. Withholding is not cruelty. It is currency. Every compliment, every reply, every ounce of affection becomes more valuable when it must be earned. Machiavelli knew that power is not found in how loudly you speak, but in how carefully you give. The one who gives without being asked, who shares everything without restraint, who pours emotion without filter, they are not seen as generous. They are seen as cheap, because what flows too freely is taken for granted. But the one who withholds, who controls what others get access to, becomes a figure of fascination. People don't chase love. They chase the feeling of being chosen. And when you withhold yourself, you make your attention feel earned, not given. That difference changes everything. It shifts the dynamic. It puts you in control of the emotional economy. Every word from you becomes a reward. Every message becomes a signal. Every glance becomes something they measure, replay, obsess over. Not because of what you said, but because you said it when you didn't have to. That's what makes it powerful. When you give affection only to those who show they deserve it, you teach people how to treat you. When you go silent instead of reacting, you teach them that your emotions are not available for manipulation. When you stop giving just because they expect it, you start reclaiming your worth. Machiavelli would argue that withholding is not about distance, it is about leverage. You are not pulling away out of fear or pride. You are holding back out of strength. Because when people believe access to you is a guarantee, they stop valuing it. But when they realize it must be earned slowly, carefully, through effort, they begin to respect it. And that respect turns into craving. It turns into loyalty. Not the kind built on fear, but the kind built on effort. Emotional leverage is created when you understand the weight of your own attention. Stop giving it to people who haven't earned your silence. Stop offering vulnerability to those who treat it as entertainment. Stop rewarding bad behavior with kindness. Withholding is not the absence of connection, it is the discipline to make connection matter. And in a world where everyone is shouting, posting, oversharing, you become magnetic by being the one who doesn't. You become rare by becoming selective. You become powerful by becoming quiet. So let them work for your warmth. Let them earn your softness. Because the moment they realize that your attention is not handed out, that it must be earned, they will treat it like gold. And they will chase it, not because you forced them, but because you made it mean something. That is the art of emotional leverage. That is the law of controlled presence, and that is how you win without ever raising your voice. The greatest mistake you can make is to give them everything. Once they have all of you, your time, your attention, your availability, your emotions, they stop looking at you with hunger. They begin to expect you. And expectation kills desire faster than absence ever could. Machiavelli would call this fatal generosity, the kind that drains your power, not because you gave too little, but because you gave too much and asked for nothing in return. When you give without limit, you train them to believe you will always be there, that your presence is guaranteed, that your value is constant. But the truth is, even gold loses meaning when it's left in the street. To keep someone's interest, their loyalty, their pursuit, you must never satisfy them completely. You must leave space between moments, silence between replies, mystery between emotions. Always keep a part of yourself tucked away, not out of cruelty, but out of design. Because the minute they feel full, they begin to digest you. They categorize you. They assume they've seen the entire map, and no one continues to explore what they believe they've already conquered. The trick is to feed them slowly, unpredictably. Give enough to ignite the flame, but not enough to burn out the wick. Let them think they're getting closer. Then step back. Let them feel you slipping just as they lean in. That's where obsession lives. Not in the having, but in the reaching. Machiavelli warned against the illusion of being too kind, too present, too eager. He understood that people respect what they fear losing, not what clings to them, not what gives everything away. You don't need to be distant to be desired. You just need to be disciplined. Give your time in pieces. Share your mind in fragments. Offer affection in echoes, not floods. Let them earn their place in your world, and never let them feel they've arrived. Because once they believe the chase is over, they stop moving, and once they stop moving, the connection dies. You must always stay one step ahead, not to manipulate, but to maintain value, to remind them silently that you are not something they can possess. You are something they must continually work to keep. That effort becomes their anchor. That uncertainty becomes your power. Never satisfy them completely. Never hand yourself over in full. Because the moment they feel there is nothing left to reach for, they will turn their eyes elsewhere. And you once, the fire will become the ash. Stay rare. Stay unfinished. Stay just far enough that they keep chasing. Not because you're gone, but because they still believe there's more to find. The one who withholds controls the pace, controls the tone, controls the outcome. Machiavelli understood that desire is not managed by the person who gives it, is ruled by the one who resists. The more you can hold back, the more you are chased. Not because you're superior, but because you've mastered restraint in a world addicted to instant gratification. People are not obsessed with those who are always available. They become obsessed with the ones who appear, leave a mark, and then vanish without warning. That vanishing is not emptiness, it's power. When you withhold your attention, you create space for their curiosity. When you withhold your emotions, you force them to examine theirs. When you withhold your presence, you invite them to feel the loss. And it's that loss, that little absence, that creates value. Most people are terrified of being misunderstood, unseen, left behind. So they overcompensate, they explain, they perform, they chase. But that chase rarely leads to respect, it leads to dependence. And dependence is the death of power. What Machiavelli would advise instead is this: become the one they orbit, not the one who orbits. Build a rhythm of absence. Let them feel your silence just after they've tasted your words. Let them feel your distance just after they've touched your closeness. And most of all, Let them feel that no matter how much they try, they will never fully have you. That is not cruelty, that is structure. Because the human mind does not attach deeply to what it can explain, it attaches to what it can't stop thinking about. So leave a question hanging in the air, leave a story half finished. Let them wonder if you'll come back. Let them question what your silence means. The ones who chase value are the ones who feel its distance. And the more consistently you withhold, calmly, intentionally, without resentment, the more they begin to assign meaning to you. You become the symbol of the thing they can't reach. And in a world where everything is sold, shown, posted, and explained, you become rare. And what is rare becomes valuable, not because it is perfect, but because it is hard to find. The moment you realize that you don't need to give more to be remembered, you begin to move like someone they won't forget. You stop chasing and start pulling. You stop proving and start choosing. And you become the one who sets the tempo of the room, not through force, but through what you withhold. That is the final rule of starved desire. You are not powerful because they want you. You are powerful because you never needed them to. If this made you think differently, subscribe for more dark strategies, real power psychology, and the laws they hope you never learn.